I'm Geoff Donaker. I run a little fund with my friend and partner, Rob Krolik, over there. And we're called Burst Capital. We invest in a lot of marketplaces. Prior to that, we were both at Yelp. I was the 10th employee and COO of Yelp for 11 years, at eBay before that, a couple other marketplaces before that. So I'm going to talk today about building a sales team in a marketplace business. Before I get started, though, a couple things. First of all, thank you to Roger and Dan for having me here today, very kind. But I also want to put out the big disclaimer. You're going to hear a lot of opinion, heuristics, rules of thumb, these kinds of things today. Every business is different. I'm not pretending that my rules of thumb are going to work for your business, but I will share the lessons learned. So please take it with a heavy dose of salt. All right. First question is, sales for marketplace? I thought we're not supposed to have salespeople in marketplaces, right? eBay's supposed to be a nice virtuous circle and it just works and you don't ever need to do sales. Well, our experience at Yelp was not that. We actually did over time build a very big sales team, somewhere in the 3,000 people today range. That became a very important avenue of growth for us. Since I left that day job a few years ago, I've since been investing in and working with a handful of other marketplace businesses who have also found their way to sales being an important part of the distribution channel for them and actually having the unit economics look pretty good. But there's a big caveat to that. There's actually several caveats, and we'll talk about them. The first one is, hopefully you only have sales on one side of your marketplace, right? You really don't want to have an expensive CAC on both sides of the marketplace. That would not be awesome. So, in the case of Yelp, for instance, we had a sales team that brings in paying businesses, and the consumers find their way to Yelp through apps and SEO. In the case of Instawork, we have a sales team that brings in paying caterers and restaurants. The workers find their way to Instawork through word of mouth and a viral network, and so on, right? So hopefully you have a free or very low cost of acquisition on the other side of the marketplace if you're going to have sales on one side. Okay, so a little bit of sales 101. Apologies to those of you who are already in this, but one of the important questions is, what's your transaction size? And I'm going to define transaction for a moment as, what's the annual value of a user, right? A new customer that you're going to acquire through your sales team. If you're going to acquire a customer that's worth $250, Netflix-ish customer, you really should not be talking to them, right? It's just way too expensive, so hopefully you're not talking to them on the phone very often. Up at the Comcast level, if that customer is going to pay you $200, $300, $400 a month, and that's now a $2,500 annual customer, hey, you could actually afford to talk to them on the phone, right? Another order of magnitude at the $25,000 level, that's a pretty valuable customer. I can actually now afford to go see that customer in person, right? I can take a car across town. I can go to LA for the day if I need to or whatnot. And then last, at this enterprise tier, I can actually get on a plane because a customer's worth, hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So sort of simple rules of thumb for what kind of sales team are you talking about. By the way, the type of people you hire, the sales motion, the length of time, everything is going to be associated with this. $250, that's like a 2-minute transaction, right? $250,000, that could be a year-long sales cycle. Okay, so in SaaS and software type businesses, the value of a customer is really easy to understand, right? First year revenue times number of years they stick with you. So if they pay you $10,000 and they stick around on average for 3 years, that's a $30,000 customer. Very easy to understand. Marketplace is a little harder. Why? Anybody? You don't know about the other side of the transaction, right? So you actually have to have a conversion rate on that. So now I could have a willing customer who says, I want to spend $10,000 a year and I want to stick around on average for 3 years, but I actually don't know if the other side of the transaction is going to show up, right? So there's this conversion rate issue that's an important factor. So, what do we do about that at marketplace businesses? Massive oversimplification, but I'm going to give you two things. The first one is analytics. Study your data like crazy, because over time, you're going to have a bigger and bigger science experiment, and you're going to have a good sense of what that conversion rate over time is going to be. Is it 100% for a $10,000 willing customer, or is it 50% or 20% or some other number, right? So analytics is a sort of a simple answer. The other one is, please experiment with pricing. Pricing is the most powerful tool in these businesses, and it is so often ignored. So I'm going to tell you a story from the early days of Yelp. These are my friends from the very earliest days. And in the earliest days of Yelp, when we started going to market, we had this great idea around the kind of ad pricing we were going to have. And what we said is, we're going to call a plumber, and Mr. Plumber, we're going to put up a bunch of ads for you on Yelp. And every time we generate a new customer call to you, you're going to pay us $10, right? Interests are totally aligned. Everybody wins. Customer only pays if they actually got a new customer, right? Everybody's happy. There were two problems with this. Number one is there was actually a fair amount of friction in acquiring customers up front, because pay-per-call was kind of weird, and I didn't really know, am I going to pay $10 this month or $1,000, and it was hard to budget for that. The other thing that happened is retention was funky. We'd get to the end of the first month, we sent a plumber 6 calls, and inevitably he would call and complain because call number 4 actually came from an existing customer. I don't really want to pay for that one. I'll only pay you $50 rather than the $60 we agreed on, right? So it's a little bit counterintuitive. So as we're brainstorming around how can we solve this problem, somebody came up with the crazy idea, what if we just packaged these things and just sold it as a fixed price thing? So for the next couple months, we started calling plumbers and basically saying like, hey, look, it costs $100 a month to advertise and buy this package of ads on Yelp. We'll tell you how many phone calls and ad clicks you get, but it's $100 a month, right? Lo and behold, 2 fun things happened. Number 1, velocity of transactions increased. Shouldn't happen, but it did. Number 2, retention increased. As a result, our customer value shot through the roof. And while that's a goofy, fun story from 2005 or 6, I would tell you that I've seen this same thing play out at a bunch of my companies over the last couple of years. It's like just counterintuitive things around pricing. Please keep experimenting with it because it is the easiest way to sort of make those unit economics work. One of the most common things that I see folks do as they want to experiment with a sales team is try one salesperson. Now, I think we all know from little kid science experiments, like the rabbits here, that one rabbit is not a great science experiment make. Because here's what's going to happen is after 3 months, you're going to be like, Joey's not doing that well. I have no idea if it's because Joey's not good at his job or it's because I have no product market fit here, right? So to the extent that you can start with at least 2 or 3 folks in your science experiment, I highly encourage you to do that because you're much more likely to have a strong conviction at the end of that 3-month cycle as to whether the thing is working and you have some level of product market fit versus just, one person who can't do it. Related to this, let's assume you've got your 3. I'm going to encourage you to keep hiring. Always be hiring. Now, I'm going to throw out a somewhat controversial idea here, which is I've started at the end of 2018 with 3 reps. I'm going to encourage you to intend to hire 2 new reps every 60 days for all of 2019. Now, like most of my founders who I've told this to, they give me this like crazed look, like that sounds nuts. I've only got 3 people. They're not even very good yet. Like, I don't know that we have a lot of product market fit. And you're telling me hire 12 more people? That's going to leave me with how many at the end of the year? Yeah, this guy's got the gist. That's exactly right. It's because most people, by the way, say 15. They're like, I can't go from 3 to 15. You're not going to, right? You forgot churn. So some of these people are not going to work out as salespeople. You're going to have to let them go. Some of these people are going to hate the job and they're going to quit. Somebody inevitably is going to have a family crisis and like be out of work for 4 months. Somebody's going to move cities. Like these are just the things that happen in the real world. And so if you hire 12 new people on a base of 3, you'll probably end the year somewhere in the range of 6 reps, which that doesn't actually sound like such crazy math, does it? Along these lines, if you get into the habit of hiring people every 60 days, one of the really nice things you can do is you can have them start on the same day. This has all kinds of nice advantages to it. One is just systematically for you, you can actually train those 2 people now in parallel, right? And kind of go through that exercise at the same time. They'll learn better because they'll actually have a peer to learn with. They'll enjoy it more on average because, I've got a buddy as opposed to like I'm the one new rep starting today, right? And it gives you a natural cadence for measuring those cohorts and classes over time as well. This is what happens in day 1, week 1, week 3, et cetera, as you go over time. So who are we hiring? I would tell you that most of my founders go like this. After they've hired their first 2 people, they say, what I really want to do is I want to call the Trulia or Yelp sales force, and hire somebody who has already risen through the ranks and has been a really successful sales rep for like 8 years. You could do that. I will tell you that if we're talking about, high volume sales on the phone and whatnot, that is not an inexpensive hire, and it doesn't necessarily ensure success, right? So you're probably going to pay triple for a hire like that, like the one I just described, versus somebody who, frankly, doesn't have a ton of direct experience, but just has grit and high energy, and you're like, let's give it a shot and see what happens. I'm intentionally caveating enterprise sales. That's its own thing. You're paying for a Rolodex. By the way, it's very expensive, and it's probably not true for most people in this room. So, on to commission. Commission is my favorite area of science experimentation after pricing. It is really, really powerful tool. I'm going to give you a couple rules of thumb on it. First of all, experiment with this like crazy too. And consider changing your commission plan like every month or two for the first couple years until you start to get a sense of what's working. And then, by the way, keep experimenting after that. Right? Number 2, pay it monthly. If you're in anything close to a high to medium volume of sales, pay a monthly commission. Personally, have had a lot of experimentation with quarterly and annual. It seems nicer, it's easier to manage and whatnot, and performance will be lower than if you pay commission monthly, just straight up. And number 3, make it matter. So as a rule of thumb, what I'm going to suggest is that on-target earnings should be 50% commission. That means if you're intending to pay your rep 80 grand, base salary should be 40, thank you, 40, right. So common problem in San Francisco, I know it's really expensive here, believe me. However, if you tell me you want to pay a rep 80 grand on an on-target earnings basis and you're going to give them a $75,000 base, good luck getting any performance out of that person, right? You basically don't have commission at that point. So if you want to have commission and you want to have it work, it has to actually matter. It has to be in a meaningful amount of the compensation. So in this particular case, just to sort of show what's going on here, basically base salary for that individual we just described at 40K, their total earnings stays at the 40K level for every month until they hit their carrying cost, right? Until they're at least bringing in enough revenue to cover their base carrying cost of what it costs you. And then you can start to have commission start to kick in. And at some point, by the way, beyond the level at which you're hitting the on-target earnings point, there's a bunch of accelerators. And so that as people get beyond their base level of performance, they can earn a lot more. This, by the way, is how you get and motivate really strong salespeople. And so by all means, you should be happy to have this. Another frequently asked question I get is like, yeah, but what if I have to pay somebody $200,000? Like, that is a problem I promise you will be really happy to have. Like, by all means, let's bring that problem on, right? Because I think everybody got it with the chuckle, but it means that they're delivering an awful lot of revenue to your company. So you should be really happy about that. That's a great problem to have. One of the tricks in this is the question of who are your leads? One of the beauties in a business like Yelp is that basically every local business in North America is a lead for our sales team. In InstaWork, every restaurant or food-oriented business is a lead. The nice thing about that is it means it's a single funnel, right? So you could assume, just for the sake of simple math here, what if every time a salesperson talks to a prospective customer, we have a 1% close rate? Okay, means 100 conversations equals one new deal, right? Pretty easy math to understand. Well, sometimes people will put a second funnel on top of that and say, I only want my sales reps to talk to a lead who has already been pre-qualified through some other marketing channel. Facebook ads, Google ads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Well, what happens there? Well, now we have like a 1% conversion rate and another 1% conversion rate, right? So as a result, our ability to close deals, gets very small very fast. We have 2 limiting reagents in our chemical reaction. And we also now have a much more expensive CAC on average because we have the first thing times the second thing, right? So it doesn't mean this kind of 2-part flow can never work. There totally are situations where it can, but it's something to be mindful of and watch carefully over time because you are giving yourself 2 different choke points in your customer acquisition funnel. Okay, back to unit economics. There are many, many ways to think about unit economics. The most simple one that I think about as it relates to a sales force is first year revenue divided by loaded carrying cost of the sales rep. So back to Joey for a moment. Joey cost me $100,000 a year, and he brings in $150,000 in this year's revenue. I'm not interested in year 2, year 3 right now, just this year's revenue, right? That, in this ratio, is a 1.5x. Scared face, right? Why is that a scared face? Anybody?
Because there are other costs.
Because there's a ton of other costs in the system, right? There's a ton of other costs in the system, including any variable costs associated with the other side of my marketplace. So really 1.5x is not great. It's better than less than 1, but it's not great. Now, as you start to get into, the 2x category, I'll give you the sort of neutral face. And it's really as you start to get into the 3 and 4x territory that this feels like a just add water solution, and you get excited about continuing to hire and build the sales team. Right? So this is kind of what we're trying to optimize for, is hopefully every sales rep is bringing in significantly more revenue by a factor than what they're costing us on a loaded basis. This is Samir. He's CEO of Instawork, and Roger knows him from years back. So Samir and I he's been standing up a sales team over the course of last year, and so we've had this ongoing sort of banter around, like, he would love to hire a VP of sales. I get it. It's back to that, like, I've got 3 people. I really want to hire a VP of sales. They're going to tell me all the things to go from, 3 to 10 to 100 sales reps and all that kind of thing. Here's the problem. Unless this person is already your buddy, when you have 3 sales reps, nobody who's a good VP of sales wants the job. You're not going to get somebody that great. As a result, I'm going to encourage you to do what Samir ended up doing, which is like manage the team personally. Manage it personally until you know that you have a science experiment that looks promising, right? Where is that? Usually it's somewhere in the 10-person range, right? And if you can't manage it personally, hopefully a co-founder or some other early scrappy team member can get in there and figure it out. I'll tell you that in Samir's personal experience, while it took him a ton of time and energy to do this, he ended up getting to know his customer, his product, and figuring out this pricing thing that we were talking about earlier in a much more intimate way than he would have if he had handed off this job to somebody else who was a new hire. And now that he's somewhere in the 12 or so team person range, he's actually been able to bring in a great VP of sales who's the person who has done it before and is the person who can now take us from 10 to 100 reps. Because that's something that you can actually hire for. You can find people who have done that. Related topic, back to the San Francisco's expensive thing, and I'm guessing some of you are here. Very frequently asked question is, hey, I've got 3 sales reps. I want to go open an office in Salt Lake City, or I want to go virtual only and have a bunch of people kind of work from home and do sales from home. I would encourage you to wait. I would encourage you to try to keep people together. The level of learning and camaraderie between the people on the team is worth a lot. And so, yeah, it's expensive here, I get it, and there's high churn in sales prospects here. If you really want to do it in Salt Lake City, I would only do it there if one of your founders or one of your real true insiders in your business is willing to stand up and go move to Salt Lake City for the next few years. Otherwise, your ability to manage that science experiment is going to be very much hampered. So, yes, sir.
What if your marketplace is international from day one?
Okay. So this is the question about international marketplace from day one. Yeah, I mean, I'd say with any distributed marketplace, distributed workforce is a great question. However, to the extent that you can get your salespeople, especially your early salespeople, to be physically proximate to one another, that'd be highly valuable. In the case of Yelp, at one point we had a multilingual sales force in Dublin, and so we had people speaking 10 different languages there, all in a single office. So I think that's often the way to go if you can do it. So wrapping this all up, I think sales can be a great distribution channel for a marketplace if a couple things are true. First off, the other side of your marketplace distribution channel is free or very low cost, right? So you don't have the double CAC issue. Number 2, your price point actually supports sales reps. This isn't a $100 a year transaction, it's thousands of dollars and above. And number 3, you've got plenty of leads, because otherwise you're going to build a big sales team and they're just going to be waiting around for some marketing engine to send them leads. So That's what I've got. I'm happy to take a couple questions now or comments from the audience. And then also, to the extent that you have one or want to build a sales force, feel free to hit me up or hit Rob up, and I'll be happy to continue the conversation with you. Yes, sir.
Any particular software in terms of CRM to manage the team?
Yeah. So can everybody hear each other, or should I repeat the questions? Repeat the questions. Okay. Is there any particular software that you should use in the early days of setting up a sales team? So, there I would give you kind of the same answer of like, in the science experiment stage, it doesn't really matter that much. I mean, the one necessary evil is some version of a CRM. The standard is, of course, Salesforce, and I would probably just recommend that. It's just easier. It's a little more expensive than some alternatives, but it scales well and it's pretty bulletproof. So that's kind of the obvious thing to do. There are lots of other potential software layers that you will add on, but I would kind of wait until you get to that 10-plus person this thing is working stage. Yes.
What pointers do you have for a sales team that is shifting from selling standard SaaS into now the company makes a marketplace, but we're keeping our same sales team? How do they pivot their approach?
Yeah. So the question there is, if we are currently selling a SaaS type product and we're extending and trying to bring customers into a marketplace, how should we think about the sales team? Without knowing specifics, I know I'm going to give you answer generalities, but what I would say is a couple things. First off, great news is you already have a sales team who's presumably already good at selling something, so that's a really good start. I think what you'll want to figure out is this pricing issue that we just talked about, right? Which is like, how can you package the pricing in such a way that you're bringing in customers that you believe are of comparable value to what you'd bring in on the SaaS side? That tends to be the problem I've seen a few times when people try to take a SaaS force that's selling, say, a $5,000 item and move over to a marketplace where they have no idea what the value of the item is. So you got to have some way to package or price that such that people aren't just wasting their time chasing nickels.
Always get requests for like do more, help us.
Yes.
And then when I do more, they can't restructure the team to support the leads coming in from additional channels.
Yeah.
Say events. Any advice there?
Yeah. So the question there is, you're a marketer, it sounds like, and so often you get the challenge of like, hey, please send us as many leads as you can on the sales team, but then sometimes you send too many, and then they don't do a good job of following up on them. I see.
Performance marketing, they've got funnel, events, no funnel, referrals, no funnel.
So leads are getting dropped when you bring them in from new sources effectively. Yeah, I mean, to some extent, what you're describing is the problem of the two-funnel system that I was describing earlier. And while this isn't necessarily a solve for you personally, I guess I would say in general for the other founders in the audience, as a result, I would always encourage the marketing organization and the sales organization to be run effectively by the same person so that they're really married up. Otherwise, I guess for you founders in the audience, if you do this thing where there's a marketing team and they report in parallel to the sales team, like you're just setting yourself up for friction. The only way to ensure that you're going to have less, but not perfect friction, is to actually have a single person who is some version of a CRO, head of revenue, right? And then have that person have marketing report into her or him, and because that way, incentives are at least aligned. Yeah.
Questions around the ethos of the sales culture you want to build your company, specifically around enterprise.
Yeah.
You're trying to figure out what the sales cycles are. You're bringing on very experienced sellers, but you're still experimenting with price and sort of your sales narrative and process. How do you balance that with the ethos you want to set in your team and the commissions that they're expecting to receive?
Yeah. This is really hard, and the question is, what about enterprise sales? And if you're trying to stand up an enterprise sales team that presumably is still in its infancy to some extent, and so you don't really know what the pricing is, and you don't really have enough data points to be able to have confidence that like this is exactly what the path should be. It's hard. I've done it now a couple of times, and one of my companies in the middle of it now. I mean, the simplest answer I would give, that unfortunately is not a great one, is set aside capital for it, because you're going to need to throw money at the problem and give it a lot of time. My personal experience has been that standing up an enterprise team is a minimum of a year and probably 10 hires, of whom maybe half are going to make it. I can't quite describe why that's been true in my past experiences, other than like that just seems to have shown up as true a few different times. So Yeah, and unfortunately, unlike the high volume stuff where you usually can know in 3 months if someone's not going to make it, the enterprise sales cycle is super long, so it'll probably take you a year to know if the person's not going to make it or not. So, sounds like my time is up, so thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.